Let's call the meeting to order at 6:30. This is the regular board meeting of March 24th. And if we have any guests out there, I'd like to welcome them to our board meeting. Next item is setting of the meeting agenda. Are there any changes? Is Mike here yet or not?
Yes.
Mike, good. Are there any changes, Mike, or anyone else?
No, not that I'm aware of.
Maybe if I could just mention one thing, Mr. President.
I think we lost Steve.
Yeah, I might interject and say it looks like he dropped off the Zoom call here.
Well, while we're waiting, I was just going to mention that 7B and C are going to kind of roll together with the presentation. So just wanted to let you guys be aware of that, but I don't think we really need to change the agenda.
Chris, maybe you can keep the meeting going while Steve's
I was just thinking that.
fixing
I
his
just
computer.
admitted him here. He should be
Oh,
coming
you
in
did.
soon.
All right.
Yep.
Thank you.
You're muted, Steve.
Okay, sorry, I got kicked off somehow. I'm back on now, so I apologize for that. We were going to see, we need a motion to accept the meeting agenda. State it.
I'll make that motion.
I'll
Jackie,
second.
Okay, it's been seconded, made and seconded. Bobby, you want to do a roll call vote, please?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Okay, the agenda's been set then, and then let's move on to the consent agenda. We have 3 items to accept. Special board meeting from February the 1st, a regular board meeting minutes from February 10th, and a regular board meeting minutes from February 24th. Are there any suggested changes? If not, then I'll call for a motion to approve the consent agenda.
I'll make a
So
motion.
moved. Jackie,
Jackie made the
Seconded.
motion, a second.
Second from Manager Taves.
Okay, thank you. Bobby, a roll call vote, please.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Okay, motion passes. Public open forum.
Aye.
Do any of our guests have any comments to make? I'll ask again, are there any comments from the public attending the meeting? If not, I'll have a motion to close the public forum.
So move.
Second, please.
I'll second.
Okay, thank you. Bobby, roll call again.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes then. Moving on then to the item number 5, which is the public hearing tax forfeit project ordering. Mike, are you going to cover this?
Well, we have Kevin Bean from UR, I think that's going to maybe
Okay.
just give a little summary, but then the board would just approve that.
Kevin?
Yep, good evening. I'm just gearing up my screen sharing here. Sorry. Can you all see the presentation I'm pulling up here?
Yes.
Yes.
So I have a few slides pulled together. Kyle is on the call here as well, my colleague at EOR, and he and I are the primary ones that have been working on this. I've got a few slides to articulate what is in your memo from the engineer's report to give you some highlights and perhaps answer some questions that you might have. And of course, Kyle and I are here to further answer any questions you might have. So these are the folks that are behind the work, including Blaine, who we've been working most closely with on this project. I know that you're all familiar or somewhat familiar with the area, but I'll give a little bit of context for those that are less familiar. The Watershed District owns 2 parcels, about 1.5 miles north of downtown Forest Lake, kind of commonly referred to within the district as one of the tax forfeit parcels. The acreage of the 2 combined parcels is just under 42 acres. You can see the 2 parcels highlighted there in yellow on the image that's on the left. The drainage area that we're taking a look at, providing some water quality and other returns to is just over 1,200 acres stemming from Himes Lake. And then the image on the right is just a drone shot that we've got. You're looking westward towards Highway 61, which serves as the west boundary of this property. There is, the district had garnered some Clean Water Fund grant dollars for that project. The award amount was just under $500,000 with a match of $123,000. That grant currently expires at the end of this calendar year. District staff have been in talks with grant authorities about extending that. It looks like that is certainly feasible. And should this project move forward, we expect the grant timeline to be extended. One of the components of the grant was we were looking to achieve a minimum of 54 pounds reduction of phosphorus to Comfort Lake. So I'll characterize the project for you as best we can here. Again, we're looking at the parcel, which is now outlined in red. The parcel, many of you have probably seen it as you've driven by on Highway 61 heading north and looking out to the east out of the right side of your windshield. It's kind of nondescript. It's a parcel that has had a little bit of farming over the years, some haying. It's certainly quite wet. On the far east end of the parcel, there is a wood stand of cottonwoods and box elder, but it's kind of a nondescript parcel. Obviously, Himes Lake drainage border is on the southern boundary of this property. As we have been looking at ways to make best use of this project in terms of water quality and quantity, additional acquisition has come up a number of times, both the property to the south and the property to the east. The project that we're characterizing for you tonight does not include either one of those properties. We've moved forward without that acquisition. Part of the reason why we've moved forward is just the timing of the grant, which is obviously sunsetting on us. I believe most of you are familiar that there have been conversations with both of those owners, and some of those conversations are continuing. But the project before you does not utilize either one of those properties. Again, a little more context for those of you that have read the lengthy memo. There perhaps might have been a little bit confusion about what's this project and what is this base project and what is the add alternate. And so I'll attempt to provide some clarity there. What Kyle and I had done was we had started to notice that there was a sub drainage. That's this drainage here in pink that we could potentially divert earlier and treat separately, since that runoff regime of that watershed is a little bit different. It's stemming from Highway 61. It's not a perennial flow like we see from Himes Lake. And so Kyle and I had isolated a separate project, an option, if you will, and that's what the difference is between the base project and this add alternate. So a schematic of the project is up on the screen now. What is in blue is comprising the base project, and what is in green or yellow, depending on your screen, is the add alternate. We've got Highway 61 here on the left. We've got the Himes Lake drainage ditch on the bottom of this image. And to give you sort of a quick little tutorial of what we are doing here is we are looking to install a simple structure within the ditch, a sheet pile type weir to slightly raise the elevation of the water to push it into the district owned property. Water then moves through the site in a very strategic way to settle out sediment, interact with plant material, and obviously get the water quality returns that we're looking for. Highway 61, this add alternate piece, we are pulling in water from the Highway 61 right away into essentially its own separate pond. And again, in terms of cost and in terms of benefit, I'll continue to sort of articulate the difference between the base and this add alternate piece. Kyle, I know you're there. By all means, if I'm neglecting to cover something pertinent, please pipe up. I should probably pause for you to do so at times as well, Kyle.
No, you're fine. I'm just having some internet issues on my end.
We put together a simple rendering of what this might look like to give you some sense again of character. This could perhaps be used for future public meetings. We would certainly also use this for permitting as well. In essence, what we're creating is a diverse wetland complex, which is certainly going to be working towards achieving water quality and quantity goals. There's a fair amount of excavation associated with this project. We need to put that excavated material somewhere. Kyle and I have been strategizing about how to do that most cost effectively. We are planning to dispose or embank of some of the material, perhaps all of it on site. And we're attempting to do that in an interesting way where we will embank it, but it will still remain wetland. And those are the areas where you can hopefully garner the gesture of shrubs or trees. We're looking to create shrub wetland, forested wetland, which happens to be a rather rare or desired wetland type in terms of creation, and replacement. So there's 5 different wetland types that we are looking to create here, all of which will have higher value than what this site is starting out with now, which is primarily a monoculture of narrowleaf cattail and a monoculture of an invasive species that most of you are likely familiar with, reed canary grass. So let's talk a little bit about offsite impacts. As you can imagine, the public could wonder, okay, what are you doing here? How is that going to affect me? I'm an adjacent landowner. I'm a landowner that's upstream. I hear you saying that you are going to be moving water around. Are you going to inundate me? We have thoroughly modeled this project and designed it in such a way that there are no offsite impacts, meaning we are not changing the flood regime in any way. There is one exception to this, albeit small. There is one exception. The modeling that we've done has shown that there would be some very small change with normal water level only within the Highway 61 right away. So again, I'll reiterate, this is only within, and actually on the upstream side, the west side of that Highway 61 right away. So this is area that's wholly owned by the state of Minnesota Department of Transportation. And we'll get a little bit more to dialogue that we've had with MnDOT. So you can see this change here, a 1/2 foot for normal water level within that right of way, and then no change whatsoever for these storm events 2, 10, and 100 year. Should this project move forward and the district order it, we will obviously continue to refine our models to ensure that there are no offsite impacts. We've thoroughly looked at cost and have some cost numbers for you tonight. We also have, what is the return on investment from a phosphorus standpoint. So the base project, I should also tell you that the dollars that you're looking at tonight include a 20% contingency. 20% is a rather large contingency, but the reason why we're using such a large contingency at this point is because we are working with preliminary design. There are not a lot of question marks, but there's some question marks with this preliminary level of design. So that's why there is a hefty contingency of 20%. So that 20% is in the numbers that you're looking at. There's also a range of costs involved. Part of the reason why there's a range rather than a prescriptive number is, again, relates to sort of the level of design that we're working with. Again, if this project moves forward, these numbers will be further refined. Contingencies will drop, ranges will tighten, and we'll have a more precise estimate of costs. So the base in and of itself, again, very conservative estimates, and including the contingency, we're looking at a range of 876 to $1,018,000. That provides a return of just over, or just under rather, $600 a pound of phosphorus. The add alternate piece is around $100,000. This is in addition. That piece in and of itself is around $1,100 a pound of phosphorus. To give you some perspective of, is this good, is this bad in terms of return on investment? One of the rules of thumb that the industry uses is, anything under 1,000 is seen as, quite favorable. The water quality benefits that we've modeled and would like to discuss with you tonight. We're going to talk about phosphorus, but we're going to talk about the other returns as well. The project that you have before you, and again, this is just the base right now, I'm just talking about the base and I'm not including the additional returns from the add alternate, but the base project in and of itself greatly exceeds the grant target. That grant target is estimated at Comfort Lake. So that 54 pounds is at Comfort Lake. We're exceeding that at a level of 60 pounds. There's a higher reduction at the practice itself. And that's why there's different removals expressed in that document. We're looking at a return of 81 pounds at the practice itself. Again, I want to tell you that these estimates are very conservative. If this project goes forward, we wholly expect to, even though we've exceeded the grant targets, we've wholly expecting to actually exceed those returns as well. To give you, this is a table that I pulled out of our report. In this column in here in the left is one methodology for determining phosphorus removals from a wetland like this. We are using the most conservative estimates. And again, we'll likely meet those or even exceed those targets. That's our expectation. The additional returns from a water quality standpoint, nitrogen, we'd be looking for a 30% removal. Heavy metals, we'd be looking at a 70% removal. Pathogens, if there are any, of the like the E. coli variety and that kind of thing, we'd be looking at 60% removal. And then sediment, this practice is quite substantial in reducing or removing rather 73% of the sediment load. Given the interest in sediment, I wanted to talk a little bit more about that and what that means in terms of volume, or in this instance, in terms of weight. We'd be looking at an annual reduction at the practice of 29 tons and an annual reduction to or at Comfort Lake of 9 tons. And again, these are annual sediment reductions from this project alone. Couple little tidbits to this project. I've got, again, a drone still photograph here. We are looking westward at Highway 61. You can kind of just barely make out what MnDOT refers to as a bridge and not a culvert here. That weir structure that I talked about early on is proposed to be located within the MnDOT right-of-way. We've had multiple meetings along with district staff with MnDOT officials and have strategized about a project that is acceptable to them. But again, should this project go forward, there'll have to be further dialogue with MnDOT and future agreements that will have to be worked on, memorandums of understanding type documents for MnDOT to accept, document this structure within their right-of-way. Any more, Kyle? You've been kind of leading a lot. Any more about that particular piece you wanted to talk about?
No, I don't think so. I mean, as we mentioned in the report, we've met with MnDOT, I think 3 times now, and overall they are very, very much in favor of the project. There's obviously just some logistical items we'll need to coordinate with them between the 2 legal counsels.
I'm getting near the end here. This right-of-way is actually pretty busy with utilities. We've already talked with all the utility authorities. We've located them. We've got overhead power here, which you can see. And the utility companies, the big ones are the overhead power, and there's fiber in this corridor. The utilities are looking to relocate those at their cost. So we've already begun the dialogue with the utilities on that front. I wanted to talk about a couple additional benefits, which I think are exciting. We had mentioned in the report, there are a number of additional benefits that we've accounted for that will provide additional water quality return, but they are not accounted for in those water quality estimates we've given you. These benefits would be above and beyond, even those numbers. We did some soil sampling out there. We found out some interesting things about some of the parent material soils that are there. It has an interesting pH, a pH that would support a plant called Chara. This plant has got some interesting properties in terms of temporary and permanently binding with phosphorus. It would be kind of a low-cost means to try to get this plant to establish. I think it's also would be very appealing to the stormwater community in terms of using this. Right now, there's research that's going on about this, but not a lot of it that is in practice. I should mention that this plant is native. It's not an invasive, and this plant actually currently exists in Forest Lake. So that's a real interesting piece. The cost for these benefits that I'm talking on these next couple of slides are already accounted for in those cost estimates, what I shared a couple of slides. All of these benefits have fairly low cost to them. You can imagine there's not a great deal of cost associated with plant material like this. The big return, I think, is in how we have characterized and designed this wetland. There's been a lot of thought put into providing landform that is really maximizing habitat returns and providing these niche habitats for both terrestrial and aquatic animals, amphibians. And so you can hopefully get a little bit of a gesture here from the grading plan that is on screen here. We also are looking at establishing, again, a forested or a shrub community. I think some of this plant material will naturally colonize, but we will give that a little bit of a boost with some planting. We are selecting plant material that is known to have the highest evapotranspiration rates. So these will be trees and shrubs that highly demand water and then transpire it, and in essence will be providing some water quantity returns. Again, something that I think has legs in terms of just general interest to the stormwater community. There is some small means gesture for littoral habitat structures. The reason why these are in here is because whether it's turtle logs, whether it's kestrel boxes, these are structures that EOR has put into multiple other projects. Species readily colonize to them, and they're readily available or visible rather to the public. And again, this is right on Highway 61. There'll be a lot of windshield time, and small investments in these types of structures is going to provide returns in terms of habitat, but potentially, education to your community. Lastly, I have a schedule for you. If this project again goes forward, what Kyle and I are thinking about is, and the way the schedule is organized is that we would begin construction this winter. So likely December of 2022, and that would carry into 2023. And we would get the bulk of the work done before February of 2023. There would certainly be some follow-up vegetation work in 2023. Working backwards in terms of all the additional steps that have to occur to get to a point of building it, we have adequate time to garner permits, get agreements in place with MnDOT, go through, of course, the public bidding cycle, and let this or bid this project early enough so that the district gets the most favorable bid results. So that was the piece that Kyle and I prepared to hopefully characterize the project and inform your decision. Certainly available to answer any other questions.
Well, thank you, Kevin and Kyle. This is a public hearing. So are there anyone attending the meeting from the public that would like to ask any questions or make any comments? I'll ask again, is there anyone in the public attending the meeting here that wants to make any comments or offer any questions? Hearing none, then I declare the public hearing closed. And I believe there's 2 motions to be passed on this project to move it forward. And just checking with legal counsel, I think we will probably do that in old business on item under A. Is that correct, Chuck?
Mr. Chair, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. So then we'll finish with the public hearing. Let's move on then to the Citizen Advisory Committee update.
Mr. President, managers, let's see, Aiden was going to call in. He's attending the Forest Lake Area School District's FFA, and he said he was in, but I don't see him on here, so I'll just grab the notes here. But our action or item this evening is that we have an applicant, Ted Hansen from Wyoming, and he's expressed an interest in joining the CAC, and per their statutory requirements, has to be appointed by the board. And we had the material in there. I see Ted is on the call here, so maybe you would like to say hello to the rest of the board.
Yeah. Hello. No.
Hi, Ted.
Hi, Ted.
Hi. So it's exciting, at least being on Comfort Lake, seeing that the previous project and the benefit it'll have to Comfort. So that is interesting. But being downstream in the watershed, got an interest on what goes on in the entire watershed, seeing how a lot flows into our lake, and both from Forest Lake through the Sunrise River, as well as coming in through Little Comfort and Bone and those lakes to the east of us. So it's like, so that's really where my interest is, okay, I'm on the downstream lake. So I have a lot of vested interest in what goes on upstream.
Okay, well, very good. Thank you for your comments. Are there any questions from the board or comments? I believe this requires a motion to.
Manager Baki here.
Yes.
I just
Go ahead.
I'd like to thank Mr. Hansen for his interest in being a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee, and having in that role as board. Appreciate, because we look to you as a citizen to be a voice for the and thank you for your interest in that.
Mm-hmm. Look forward
Thank you,
to it.
Dave. And how do we approve this? Is through a motion? Chuck?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
This is Jackie.
So-
I'll make the motion to appoint Ted Hansen to the Citizens Advisory Committee.
And I will second that.
Thank you.
I just wanted
Bobby,
to,
please have a roll call.
no, can we have a moment of discussion just for a minute?
Sure. Sure.
Okay.
Yes.
I
Go ahead,
just wanted
Jackie.
to just let the board know that Ted is a retired CFO. And so when he contacted me, I was more than thrilled to have that expertise on board, as I take over the treasurer and then are looking to modify our reports in some manner. So I'm opportune moment, Ted. I'm glad to see you step forward. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other comments or questions? If not, Bobby, would you please do a roll call vote?
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Schmalz,
Aye.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. And Ted, congratulations, and we welcome you to the team. We look forward to your contribution. So jump in with both feet.
All right, thank you. Yeah,
Thank you.
might need a life jacket.
Good, thank you so much.
Yep.
Okay, moving on then to new business. Item A is the permit for the Teets Farm.
Mr. President, managers, right, there are two items here. There's both the permit and then an associated joint powers agreement with Rice Creek Watershed District. And I'm trying to remember, council, if the JPA needed to be done first, I believe so, and then take action on the permit.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So the joint powers agreement is pretty straightforward. You can see toward the end of the memo section, there's the document itself just articulating that they would allow us to perform the permitting for the area that lies within the Rice Creek Watershed District, and that was per the request of the property owners. I don't know if Bobby can pull that up. This would be a roll call vote, and then Mr. President, we would look for you to come in and sign it. There's an executed one already from Rice Creek, approved this yesterday, and the applicants have signed it already as well.
Okay, so I guess, are we ready to entertain a motion?
A little further up, Bobby. I guess I'll make the motion to approve the joint powers agreement between Rice Creek, Comfort Lake for permitting of permit 22-003 Teets Farm.
Okay, thank you, Chris. So is there a second?
I'll second that.
Okay, thank you, Doug.
Yep.
Any other discussion on that before we vote? Okay, if not, Bobby, would you please do a roll call vote?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Loaf,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. President, District Engineer, Mr. Grasky is here to go over the permit application itself.
Yep. Bobby, if you can scroll down to the kind of colored exhibit, and I will walk us through the permit. So, Mr. President and managers, we got permit application 22-003 Teets Farm. It's a 141 acre site with 2.6 acres of impervious cover and 4 single family home lots. Bobby, could you scroll down to the figure? So this site is located at the headwaters of Judicial Ditch 6, so south of Forest Lake, right kind of at the top, right at the boundary with Rice Creek Watershed District. Basically in that area, there's a very large expansive wetland at the headwaters there that then flows down to Forest Lake. What's being proposed here is to take those 3 parcels and make them into 4 parcels. So kind of adjusting the lot lines to allow for 4 single-family homes. As part of that, they'll be pulling in a small road extension and then some long driveways to some house pads. Obviously, these will be very, very big lots, being that it's 141 acres that's being split up here. For stormwater management on the kind of the north side there in the middle, and the pink areas, they're proposing some filtration basins and then a stormwater pond. So kind of all of that main road extension and then portions of the driveways and some of the houses is being routed to that. The rest of the impervious is just sheet flowing through large open space and then also through the dedicated buffers that will be incorporated into this plan. So there's, I think, 7 wetlands on site. The district rule applies because of the subdivision, the buffer rule. On those smaller isolated wetlands, the required buffer width will be 25 feet. On that large wetland complex in the middle that they're calling wetland 6, there's a 75-foot requirement for a buffer. So on that west side between the houses and the big wetland, you can see the 75-foot buffer. And then kind of the interesting thing is, so that the large kind of purple area to the east of that big wetland, there's actually pockets of wetland within that. Pockets of upland and wetland. The applicant wasn't really interested in doing anything with that, didn't want to go through the expense of delineating that and doing MinRAM assessments. So they've actually agreed to put all of that area within a buffer. And also, in addition to that, the city of Forest Lake is going to get a conservation easement over both the wetland and those buffer areas adjacent to that big wetland. So I think that's a good thing. It's definitely an area that the district would like to see protected. So, I think overall we're going from a site that was, at least the upland areas were row cropped on occasion. And I think what we'll end up with here is better water quality and better protection for the wetland. So I'm recommending approval of the permit with the conditions stated in the report. Those conditions include making sure that all that east side of wetland 6 is included in the buffer declaration. They have since provided that, at least the figure that will go along with the declaration to that effect. Survey of the existing buffer vegetation wetland 6 and incorporation of a revegetation plan as needed. So yeah, I guess I should have mentioned on all the smaller wetlands, they're going to come in and put in a native buffer around all of those because those areas were currently being farmed. On wetland 6, it's not quite clear what needs to be done there yet. It is a slope that's well vegetated right now. The only question is whether or not there's invasive species over a threshold. The rule calls out 30%, where we'd want them to come in and either do some management of the vegetation or reseed. So they're going to do a survey of the existing buffer vegetation, and then depending on that, we'll make a decision whether or not more work needs to be done to that buffer or whether we just want it protected. Then we got the stipulation, kind of our standard maintenance and buffer agreements, financial assurances for the gradient alteration and stormwater management. And then we have a couple of stipulations of the permit. We want the buffer markers installed before they start block grading, so we make sure they don't end up in the buffer. And then submittal of an as-built survey for the stormwater features and outlet pipe. So that's my recommendation, and I'm open to any questions.
Thanks, Greg. Are there any comments or questions from the board?
I have some.
Jackie, go ahead.
Okay, I found this map to be pretty hard to follow. The key's not really distinguished, but upon blowing it up, I can see that there are property lines, easement lines going all the way through the green and the red for the first 2 lots. I assume that those yellow boxy looking marks are houses on the
Yep.
east side, is that correct? So that's
Yep.
the front of the lot, it's the buildable part of the lot. But I don't see those markers for house 3 and 4. So can you walk me through what that, how that's divided up, or is it?
So you're wondering where the specific lots are?
Well, I can see, well, I'm pointing, but you can't see me pointing. On the very top, you can see those 2 yellow boxes that are pretty close together. So I assume that's house 3 and 4.
Those two. All right, let me, so there's a house here. There's a house here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a house here.
Yep.
And there's a house here.
Okay, what I'm not seeing, you see those easement markers going, the thin line, the thin black line going all the way from house 1, we'll start down there. And it goes through that easement, which is purple. I understand, right? That's the buffer
Yep.
area.
Down here you're talking about?
Yes, yes. Well, and going horizontally too, from the house through the green and the black, or excuse me, the green and the purple. That looks like a,
Oh, you're talking about this
easement.
line here?
yeah,
That line?
yes. What is that?
So that's just kind of a call out on their plan set. What it says there is conservation easement over that area. So basically, conservation easement to the city will be over this entire area.
So the entire green and purple area will be conservation easement?
Well, with the exception of not this green area, because that's not part of this development. That's on
Okay.
a separate parcel.
Okay, that was my next question. So that now I understand. So that has nothing to do with this permit.
Correct.
Okay, all right, very good. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions, comments? If not, then I'll call for a motion to approve the application 22-003.
I will make the motion as presented with the conditions and stipulations as stated.
Thank you, Jackie. A second, please. I will second. Jackie, any other discussion? If none, then let Jackie, Bobby, could you please do a roll call vote?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Lowe.
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Barkey.
Aye.
Okay, thank you. Motion passes. Thank you. Next item is 7B, total suspended solids loading analysis presentation.
Mr. Chair, board members, we have Jim Almendinger here along with other EOR staff to discuss this. The board had some questions about this topic at some past meetings. And so staff sat down then with Cecilio and Jim and others, kind of went through this, and we just thought that it would be best to give a little presentation. This would be I guess a prelude to some of the other monitoring things. The monitoring report is not to be discussed this evening, only for distribution. But I don't know, Cecilio, if you or Jim were going to start on this.
Yes, I mean, I can, Mr. Chair, managers, like to make maybe a quick introduction. First, I'd like to start by saying that it would probably make more sense to flip items 7B and 7C in the agenda. So we'll start with 7C first. And so what through the two presentations, small presentation we're putting together today, we will be given a general overview of the 2021 monitoring report. To put it in context with other efforts in the district, and also to facilitate the review by the board. It's going to come soon. the project will be presented in April 14th and then formally approved potentially in April 28th. But anyway, we will also present our assessment of lake sedimentation. That's what Manager Kinney was making reference to. And we wanted to start our analysis with Comfort Lake, being the most downstream lake. It makes sense to do it in that fashion. So that will be another part of the presentation. And so I guess I would like to introduce the people presenting today. We have Jim Elmendinger, Rosie Russell, and Trevor Brownell. Jim, as you probably know him, is a member of the UR team and worked for many years at the St. Croix Research Station as a senior scientist. And Jim will be providing the big picture assessment of the 2021 monitoring data. We're not really going to be discussing things in detail in this presentation. That will be done next board meeting, but it will provide, what I consider to be a very interesting big picture assessment of the monitoring data, what the monitoring data is telling us for 2021. And also Jim will present on his assessment of the Comfort Lake sedimentation patterns from a couple of what I consider to be very interesting perspectives. So I think it's a presentation the board will enjoy. So Rosie, she is an environmental scientist that has been the coordinator for the 2021 data gathering process. She will provide some context on how stream and lake monitoring is used to inform diagnostic studies and other activities by the district. And Trevor is a professional engineer that specializes in monitoring data, interpretation, and statistics. And he was the one that organized the data and provided statistical analysis of trends in the report. And so he will present the rationale for data collection and in general terms, how the report is organized so that the board may have a better idea when it comes to review it. So with that, is that you, Rosie, who's going to start first?
Yes, and shall I, Bobby, do you mind if I share my screen? Thank you. Just going. All right. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Perfect. And are you seeing the presentation?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, so thanks, Cecilio. My name is Rosie Russell, as Cecilio said, and so I'm just going to start us off by getting a brief overview of the district's adaptive management approach to monitoring to get everyone up to speed on the 2021 monitoring season and the context of this in all of the monitoring that's done in the district. So in February of 2020, Dr. Megan Funke submitted a lake and stream monitoring program recommendations memo to the district. This memo provides guidance for lake and stream monitoring to support the district's adaptive management approach needs over the next 10 years. So as a part of this comprehensive watershed management plan. So the adaptive management approach has 5 key phases. First, the targeted tributary monitoring to assess the state of the system. Then the diagnostic modeling reports to model the sources of pollutions, the project feasibility and planning to identify projects, project design and implementation, and finally project effectiveness monitoring to evaluate projects for if they're improving the resources. So to do this effectively, a new monitoring scheme was set up as follows. So there's 2 different aspects of the monitoring. There's the stream monitoring, and then there's the lake monitoring. So with stream monitoring, we have first our long-term stream monitoring, and this is used to track large-scale pollutant reductions from each of the lake management districts. So we have 6 sites that have been monitored annually since 2004. It says 2014, but it should say 2004. And then there's the diagnostic monitoring. And so this is routine evaluation of which tributaries are primary sources of pollutants to district lakes. This is done on a 3-year rotation. So in 2020, Little Comfort and Bone Lake Management districts had diagnostic monitoring done. this 2021 season, Forest Lake Management District was monitored. And now in the upcoming 2022, we'll be doing the Comfort Lake Management District. So next we have the project effectiveness monitoring, and this is used to evaluate load reductions, to evaluate if load reductions are being achieved for the projects that have been implemented. And also if the effectiveness of the project is decreasing, then we need to determine if any operation and maintenance activities will be needed. And so these are done on rotation based on interest and also budget. And then lastly, there's the DIY program. And so this is the citizen-led tributary monitoring. This program is still being developed, but it's intended to get citizens to grab samples throughout the season in locations where data is not being collected to determine if any stormwater outfalls or tributaries warrant further investigation as a potential hotspot for pollutant loading. So if we're not currently looking at it, this will help us say, we need to look at this in more detail. So next we have our lake monitoring, and we use this data to conduct long-term trend analysis for lakes with district goals and also to assess baseline conditions for minor lakes in the district. So there's two different types of lake monitoring that we do, and the district does this. And so this is the surface monitoring and the in-lake monitoring. So with the surface monitoring, we're looking at total phosphorus, chlorophyll A, and Secchi depth. And that's done about 14 times throughout the year. And then different ranges of frequency depending on the lakes. So we have the sentinel monitoring, which are all the major lakes that have district goals. So that's done annually. Then there's the routine monitoring, which is more semi-frequent. And this is minor lakes with district goals. So this is done for 2 consecutive years every 5 years. Then we have our rotational monitoring. And so this is minor lakes without district goals. And this is less frequent, done for 2 consecutive years every 10 years. And lastly, there's the limited monitoring, which is lakes with limited access or characterized by predominantly wetland characteristics. And so those are monitored as needed. And so then the citizen-led monitoring is the monitoring that is done by the citizens. And so this is ranges and it varies on who monitors and how many people are available to do that, but it's citizens volunteering their time to go out and collect that data. And then that's supplemented by the district if there's no citizens available to monitor those sites. And so then lastly, we have the in-lake monitoring. And so here we're looking at dissolved oxygen, temperature profiles, and bottom orthophosphate. And this is specifically for any lake with a completed or planned alum treatment to determine long-term effectiveness of alum treatment or to assess the need for a future one. And so that's done for 2 consecutive years every 5 years for those lakes that are selected. So that is just an overview of what the monitoring program is. And now I'm going to pass it on to Trevor, who's going to talk a little bit about the 2021 monitoring season.
Thanks, Rosie. And before I get into the 2021 monitoring, just wanted to provide a brief overview of why we're collecting all this information. Starting with the lakes, we're collecting data primarily focused around phosphorus. And phosphorus is important because it's the limiting nutrient for algae growth. And too much algae in the lake is harmful to aquatic life, and it's harmful to the recreational value of the lake. It's harmful to aquatic life because it consumes all of the oxygen in the lake, and so there's less oxygen for other aquatic life like fish and plants to function normally. And it's also harmful in that it increases the turbidity, which we measure using a Secchi disk depth. Secchi disk, which you can see in the slide. And the turbidity basically prevents sunlight from reaching the bottom of the lake where plants need it to grow. And it also prevents fish from being able to see their food. And then lastly, algae growth is harmful to recreational value because basically no one wants to swim in a smelly green lake. So you'll find this information in our report under the Lakes chapter, where you'll find tables of information summarizing lake water quality compared to both district goals and state standards. You also find a wealth of information about each lake in the Appendix A, which has basically a lake summary for each lake that was monitored this year. I don't have time to go over all the stuff in that lake summary, and that'll be in the next board meeting presentation. Next slide, please. So why are we collecting all the stream data? That's primarily focused on how we're managing the lakes. We do this by monitoring the load coming out of each of the different tributaries. And all load is it's a measure of the amount of water flowing through each of the stream, multiplied by the amount of pollutants within the water or concentration. You combine those and you get the load. And with the loads, specifically with the diagnostic monitoring Rosie was mentioning, we can use that information to identify hotspots in each of the different lake management districts, which then helps us identify where we need to build practices or reduce the load in some way. And then we can, once we've identified those practices, like we've done at the tax forfeit wetland that Kevin mentioned earlier, we can assess the benefits of practices by calculating a load reduction, which then leads back to the water quality improvements that we're hoping to see in the lakes. The streams information can be found in the streams chapter, where we've summarized the flow volumes we've measured this year, the loads that we've calculated, and the average concentrations. You can also see more detailed information in Appendix B, where we have figures showing the flow that we measured and the sample concentrations in each of the different tributaries. For the long-term monitoring sites, we provide these tables because we can also use the stream data to assess kind of their conditions to state standards and whether they're meeting their uses effectively. Next slide. So where did we collect data in 2021, or what did we collect? We collected data in the Sentinel Lakes, which are Comfort, Little Comfort, Forest, Moody, Bone, and Shields, and Keewatin Lake. And then we also did, the district staff collected data at School Lake, Birch Lake, and Second Lake. This year was the first year that district staff collected all of the lake data in the district. And then we collected the stream monitoring sites at all the long-term monitoring sites, which are located throughout the watershed district. And then we did intensive diagnostic monitoring within the Forest Lake Management District, which as you can see is all the dots surrounding Forest Lake. And then lastly, we did effectiveness monitoring at 2 additional sites, one at Broadway Avenue, to assess the whether the iron enhanced sand filter at that site is still functioning normally. And we also continued monitoring at Shields Lake Reuse, since reuse projects are kind of a new BMP that's being installed in Minnesota. Next slide, please. So what did 2021 data look like? Starting with the climate, you'll see in this figure, we're summarizing both the annual precipitation on the y-axis and the annual mean temperature on the x-axis. In 2021, you'll see that we are right to the right of the solid gray line or solid vertical line, which means that we were a lot warmer than normal. And we were also below the horizontal line, which represents the typical precipitation we expect in the district. So we were drier. So this just shows that we were basically in a drought, as I'm sure most of you have heard. In addition, I'm showing in the gold dots are the most recent 30 years of data for temperature and precipitation. And you'll see compared to the historic points in gray, we're shifting to a normal that has higher temperatures and higher precipitation. This is the effect of climate change, and it's making, and basically this trend of higher temperatures and higher precipitations is making it more challenging to do watershed management because both of the higher temperature and higher precipitation creates more variability and kind of the hydrologic cycle, and faster, it's moving basically faster. You're both losing water faster from having more evaporation from higher temperatures. Then you can also gain water faster by having more precipitation. So that fluctuation is very difficult to manage properly. Next slide. So how did that climate impact the 2021 monitoring? Starting with the total suspended solids loading rate on the top, and then the total phosphorus loading rate on the bottom. You'll see this year's data in blue and the 10-year average in gray. And all of these are all of this information is normalized by the drainage area. So because otherwise Comfort Lake Outlet and Comfort Lake Inlet would look disproportionately large just because they're the most downstream sites. So what does this data show? It basically shows that the drought, there's less flow volume through these long-term monitoring sites. So we had less load coming out of the watershed district. The red boxes surrounding Bone Lake long-term monitoring sites is just an indicator that we had some equipment error failures in the during the monitoring season, so we don't have the same monitoring period as the rest of the sites. The beaver at Little Comfort Lake Inlet is to show that we had issues with beavers plugging culverts and causing the water to rise. So we can't, that makes it almost impossible to measure flow accurately at that site, so we can't calculate loads. We still have concentrations at those sites, but we don't have accurate flow measurements. And then lastly, you'll see the uncertainty of these calculations as the black lines, uncertainty bars. And basically all of the sites have less load than the 10-year average. Besides Comfort Lake Outlet that has a high uncertainty, and there's basically one sample in early March that had a high TSS, high phosphorus and sediment concentrations that created that uncertainty. Yeah, and that uncertainty is higher this year because of the drought. We have smaller loads, which is the reference value, and then we have less storm events to sample from. So there's a smaller population, which creates a larger uncertainty. Next slide. So this is what the lakes look like this year. In blue, you'll see 2021, and gray is the 10-year average. And then you'll see state standards are plotted in purple. So the lower line, or the 60 micrograms per liter, is the state standard for shallow lakes. And shallow lakes in the district include Birch Lake, School Lake, Second Lake, and Shields Lake. And then the 40 micrograms per liter standard is for all of the other lakes, which are just deeper lakes. As you can see, all of the lakes this year are below the 10-year average, which is showing an improving trends in most of the lakes. And that's partly just because we have less loading coming into the lakes this year. And that's also a sign of our work implementation in the watershed district. The biggest change is Moody and Shields highlighted in green. The majority of these decreases is because of alum dosing that have occurred in the past several years, which has greatly improved the water quality in those two lakes. And yeah, next, Jim will be discussing the big takeaways you should get from the report.
Mr. Chairman and board members, nice to be here. Thanks for having us. Cecilio asked me to give kind of a 30,000 foot overview of the report, so I took a few days and read it over and thought it was done really pretty well. And Trevor's already made a lot of the main points, and my comments are also very summarized in the first 2 or 3 pages of the monitoring report that you'll see shortly. So go ahead, Rosie, and advance it here. It was a dry year, as Trevor mentioned, and less runoff means in general you have less delivery of these components, sediment, nutrients from the landscape into our waterways, and therefore that bodes well in general for our water resources. There are some exceptions when droughts get very severe, but at this stage, it was good for your lakes and rivers. Streams are of mixed quality, or they're really pretty good, but they're very good, I think, for the sediment in general. And you've made progress on the phosphorus. There are a lot of streams that still do not meet the 100 micrograms per liter phosphorus standard, but I think that is really a statement of the fact that dissolved components like phosphorus are more difficult to achieve regulatory compliance with. And it may be you're doing everything right, and it's just going to take some time for phosphorus to work its way through the system. Phosphorus was oftentimes associated with particles, but now that we've done a good job of getting rid of the sediment in our waterways, the phosphorus is moving more in the dissolved phase, and this is just a little harder to control. The lakes, I think, are all in pretty good shape. They, in general, of course, the ones that aren't. Moody and Shields are incredibly much improved. The alum treatment looks to be highly successful, and of course, you want to keep an eye on that. Sometimes those absorbed layers break down a little bit over time, and you get more phosphorus back into the water column. But for the time being, it looks great. Other lakes have buildup of phosphorus in the bottom waters. There's no surprise about that, and that indicates substantial internal loading. As you, I guess, Rosie, click the next image there. See if my lake diagram comes up. You have stratification in the summertime between the warm epilimnion on top and the cold hypolimnion in the bottom, which is colder and denser. So there's a density gradient that separates the water at the top from that on the bottom. And as long as that density layer maintains that separation, then all the buildup of phosphorus in the bottom, you can, Rosie, the next picture will show the buildup of phosphorus in Comfort Lake over this last summer. It's the light dots here. This is the growing season. It increases here quite a bit, but as long as that thermocline, that barrier between the upper and bottom waters remains intact, it won't affect the algal growth in the upper epilimnion that much. I mean, what you got to worry about is the curious thing will be in the future, what conditions will allow that thermocline to break down. If it gets, cool, windy weather late in the season, you might break apart that thermocline and that would inject a great deal of phosphorus-rich water into the photic zone, and you could have harmful algal blooms as a result of that. So it'll be interesting to keep an eye on this, and it'll be curious. I don't know how much of this buildup in the hypolimnion. I'd like to see how much of that is a consequence of the buildup of phosphorus in our waters and on our landscape over the last century or so, and how much is natural. I think there's probably some natural component to this as well. So they're not exclusive. They could work in concert, but it'll be good to see and keep an eye on these things over time, as you're doing. Overall, I guess I'd say I was very impressed with the very large effort to sample this watershed. You've got a lot of sites sampled, both streams and lakes. It's a huge collaborative effort, and you've done a really good job mobilizing a lot of forces, getting citizens involved as well as different agencies. So I think overall it's a really good job. And I think, are we done with that, Rosie, now? Are we're ready to, any questions on the monitoring overview for the moment? And remember, you'll see more of this, I believe, next month when you will have a better chance to see the full report.
Steve?
Yes,
Mr.
go ahead,
Chair?
Jackie.
The only comment I would have is to ask EOR to explain why we monitor in these rotations, because that's something that we started not too long ago. we had our sites, our long-term sites that we were monitoring. And then the decision came about to change the other monitoring to more of a rotation because we've built up a history of data, and that Dr. Funky was mentioned earlier, and in her experience working with us, she felt that doing that targeting diagnostic monitoring when we go from one lake management district to another was giving us the data that was needed for those types of project builds or identifications. And I'm kind of explaining it now, but I just thought it was important for the new members to understand why we have that rotation in our matrix.
Yeah, I think I can jump in here. I think Manager Anderson kind of answered her own question, like she said there, but yeah, I think it's, well, I think it's two things, right? Like, we have a long track record, we have a lot of data across the district, and then also there's, just a function of utilizing district funds the best way we can. Sure, it'd be nice to have a continuous record on every single lake and every single tributary every single year for the next 2 decades, but there's a great cost that comes along with that. So I think being strategic about where we monitor, focusing on priority resources that we monitor every year, but then doing some rotational monitoring on, I don't want to say not important, but resources that aren't as high priority based on the watershed management plan. And then also with the diagnostic monitoring, we did really want to dive in and look at some of these sites, these smaller sites and tributaries that, in the past weren't high priority. But we wanted to kind of do a rotation between Lake District to capture some of those and just make sure that we weren't missing some load source that's affecting the water quality on the lakes. So hopefully that kind of answers the question. I don't know, Manager Anderson, is that kind of what you're looking for? Is there
I think
more?
so. I think so. There was a map that showed, I counted them, 18 monitoring sites on Forest Lake. And Forest Lake has been undergoing its diagnostic study period, if you will. And so we were focused on projects for Forest Lake for the last probably 3-4 years based on that. And now it's moving into Comfort Lake District. And so Comfort Lake is going to get that deep dive into this diagnostic monitoring. And I just wanted to have the new members understand why you see that changing, that you'll see focus, really intense focus on one lake management district. We have 4 major ones. And we're moving into Comfort, so you'll see some of that intense monitoring on Forest Lake starting to wane over the next couple of years, and you'll see a more intense monitoring in the Comfort Lake districts.
Yep.
So it's important to
That's
understand that basis, I think.
Yep, that's exactly right. And we've actually, identified some really important projects for Forest Lake, some of those that we've gotten grants for, and so we're moving into the implementation of those. And like Manager Anderson mentioned, we're gonna do an intensive search around Comfort Lake this year and see if there's any particular sites or projects that jump to the top that we need to dive on next.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I have just one, it's a little off topic, but for Jim, I'm sure you're familiar with the wake boat study that has just been recently completed by the University of Minnesota. And I'm sure you're familiar with wake boats and the power they have in disrupting water deeper than most other motors. Do you see any possibility, or it didn't seem to me that the University of Minnesota even discussed this issue of how wake boats may break that pent up phosphorus in the bottom of the lake, if you know what I'm getting at. To me, it would be a prime candidate to wreak havoc on lake, but I don't believe it was even part of their study. And I don't know whether you've had a chance to look at that or not, but they're missing the big boat on that, in my opinion, if they don't look at it.
Yeah, I did not see the study. I know a little bit about wake boats. I've been asked about them, and when I admitted I didn't know much about them. But I do think that you're right, that this disruption of, this depth of turbulence can could facilitate, obviously, breaking down parts of the thermocline at least. Especially if the wind blows one way, it'll blow the surface water over to one side of the lake. And so the thermocline will tilt, and the bottom waters will come up it'll be the windward side of the lake as the other waters, the top waters blow into the leeward side of the lake. So it's possible when the thermocline is on the shallow end of the lake and you have wake boats there, that it could in fact, maybe reach with thermocline and cause some erosion, some breakdown of that density barrier that kind of helps isolate the bottom waters from the top. That's entirely speculative, but you're right. I mean, I'd like to know what that relation is and how deep those waves go. And the thermocline varies with depth depending on size of the lake and the wind fetch and the temperature that the lakes have seen that much. So in lakes with a particularly shallow thermocline on the right day, yeah, I think it would be feasible to happen. So.
Steve, just to jump in,
Yes,
that's
Jackie.
phase 2 of the report. So phase 1 was monitoring the wave action,
Okay,
mostly on the surface, but they do know enough that it is causing damage to a disturbing sediment. And so that's phase 2, is looking at what you brought up. And
Okay,
that's
great.
hopefully starting this year.
okay. I
doing
wasn't
it-
aware there was
doing
a
it-
second stage to the report, so I'm glad you brought that up, Jackie. Thank you.
Yeah.
Good. Any other questions? I think we got a good start on this, and hopefully it's good basic information for our new members. We spend a lot of money on this each year, as you'll see here in the next item. And so we want to make sure we extract the most value we can from it. And that's been our goal all along. So is there any, I don't think there's any voting or issues here. We just move on to the next subject. Is there anything we have to approve, legal counsel? Chuck?
Mr. Chair, I don't believe so. Your administrator can advise if I'm wrong.
So, okay.
Mr. President, managers, that's correct. Our intent was just to present the material, give the board a chance to review it. We can add it to the April 14th discussion, our board meeting for discussion, take comments, and then finalize a report to be accepted at the end of April, at which time will coincide with a couple other reports, our annual report and our progress report. So this is just trying to get out in front of it. We do have still our other topic at the top of that. Mr. Almendinger was only available to be at this meeting, so it kind of worked out in our favor. And since we were talking about the monitoring overall, then there was this outlying question from the board about total suspended solids and the loading analysis of what that would bring. So I think we can go back to that item on the agenda, and then item D will be then the scope of work for 2022. And that
Right,
will
and that requires a motion, right? Okay.
correct. That's an action item. Mhm.
So we need to jump back up to item 7B, is that correct? And have Jim cover that?
Right.
Correct.
Okay, great.
Should be a presentation with it.
Yep. Right, I need to share the screen, so I guess there we go. Do you want to continue? Yes. And with that, okay, you should all be seeing that. It looks like I am.
Yep, looks good.
So we scratched our heads about this. We had a question about, well, how does Comfort Lake receive and accumulate a large load of sediment? Because that's a concern, of course, and it's an important lake. This kind of builds it makes us ask a number of questions to answer this. In addition, one is I want to make sure that we are all talking about the same thing when we talk about sediment. It's a mixed bag, and we want to make sure we're talking about the same component of sediment. And then the question is, well, how much of this actually gets into Comfort Lake, and how do we know? And how much do we know? Because it's a difficult thing to answer, really. And is this a large amount? Once we determine what it is it how does it compare to standards or other sites? And all these seem like pretty simple questions, but there are a lot of calculations that go into them, and there's errors in every calculation you make. And when you multiply those errors together, you can get the end result can have much larger errors than you might think, I guess, or multiplied errors. So you come at this from as many different ways as you can, in independent estimates, and then you hope that they intersect in some place and give you kind of a triangulated answer to improve what our understanding. So just to cover what sediment is, to make sure we're on the same page, lake sediment are all about the particles that come into the lake and that have settled or that could settle to the bottom. Okay. There are particles delivered by streams and overland runoff and dustfall. Some lakes get virtually all their inorganic materials from dustfall. And some of these are large grain things like sand. We're not so worried about that here. We're mostly worried about the suspended sediment that gets into the lake water that causes turbidity. This shades out algae and the macrophytes. It disrupts some of the other biota as well, the fauna. And it is composed of some organic matter, materials like eroded from peat and algae, or algae that grows in the stream. We call this volatile suspended solids because it's measured by taking the sediment and then burning it in a furnace to get rid of the organic matter. It volatilizes away as carbon dioxide and water. And what's left behind then is the non-volatile component. This is what we think of basically as eroded soil, the clays and silts from our soil erosion issues. There are also particles created in the lake, and they can be a large component of lake sediments. Here we go. There are particles that are created out of into organic matter that we grow algae out of dissolved carbon dioxide and water through photosynthesis. Plants that grow in the littoral zone as well, the macrophytes. We have a lot of inorganic particles that are formed in the lake. Calcium carbonate was dissolved when it comes into the lake, and then it precipitates out when algae reduce the CO2 and raise the pH of the water. Then this white particles fall down to the bottom and settle out. There are diatoms, which are algae that have glass cell walls. They produce this biogenic silica, we call it, and they will settle out as well. And once the diatoms die, then this becomes part of the inorganic load. There are metal oxides and salts that can form in the sediment, but they're not so much in the water column. This first category, the particles that are delivered, this is driven by runoff processes that cause erosion and overland flow that enters the streams and lakes, delivers the soil erosion to our water bodies. The particles that are created in the lake are primarily driven by photosynthesis. Nutrients delivery to the lakes that allow algae to grow, and those chemical changes then cause these other inorganics to form, like the calcium carbonate. I think this is the component we're most concerned about: the soil erosion, the clays and silts that cause the turbidity in our streams and in our lakes. This is the part, of course, that we have some control over by putting best management practices on the landscape. And as we talked about, we've done a pretty good job with some of the sediments in your district. What's actually in this Comfort Lake sediment? As you might imagine, a large component of it is organic, some washed in, but I think most of it's probably from algal productivity in the lake. There's this calcium carbonate component. It can be fairly large, 25%, say, plus or minus. There are these diatom shells, the biogenic silica, and that's 15% is pretty large for most lakes, but I think a lot of them do have diatoms on the order of 5%. Excuse me. Then there's this inorganic component, eroded soils, the silts and clays. And like I say, this is the component that I think we're most concerned about in your system getting into our streams and our lakes. So the question is, how much input loading and accumulation of this category, the inorganics, the clays and silts, does Comfort Lake receive? I mean, there's the lake itself, a diagram of it with an input loading there. How big is that? Of what comes into the lake, we want to know how much settles down to the bottom, and then how much ends up going out the outlet. So this is the sediment budget. There's an input minus the output equals the sediment trapping that goes into the bottom of the lake. Okay, so that's what sediment is. The second question is, then how much sediment does Comfort Lake actually receive? And well, we've tried to measure that. You guys have tried to measure it a couple different ways. One is by using a very clever technique that my colleagues at the research station helped develop. And that's looking at sediment accumulation by using a lead-210 technique. Lead-210 is a naturally occurring radioisotope that falls out of the atmosphere at a pretty regular rate. It's different in the southern hemisphere, but the northern hemisphere is a pretty regular rate. And once you know that rate and compare it, then you have some idea about the sediment accumulation rate in the lake. The second way is by measuring the sediment budget as best we can, by measuring the stream flows and the concentrations of sediment in those streams coming into the lake. You've got the Little Comfort Inlet on the very southern tip. You've got the Sunrise River Inlet here on the northwest side of the lake coming out of Forest Lake by the Sunrise River. And then what goes out the outlet is the difference between the inlets and the sedimentation rate and what's left to go in the outlet. So we have these two ways of trying to measure sediment loads into the lake. What did we find? Well, the lead-210 method requires collecting a sediment core from the lake and measuring the sediment content, the organic matter and the inorganic content and the carbonate content, and the lead-210 concentration in a series of samples down the lake. And this will give us the sediment accumulation rate, that is the weight, the grams per square centimeter per year that fall to the bottom of the lake. And it also gives us a focusing factor, which is how representative that little coring site is of the rest of the lake. The average focusing factor for a lake is 1 over the whole basin. Parts of the lake that receive more than the average have a focusing factor of more than 1. And then the periphery of the lake that doesn't receive the same amount, receives less than the average, has a focusing factor less than 1. So we need to know what that is in order to extrapolate the rate at one small point across the rest of the lake basin. So at the lake basin, at the core site rather, the guys measured the accumulation rates here in this blue curve. You can see, does my cursor show up to you guys? The arrow?
Yeah, it's fine.
Oh, okay, good. And so this is about at, I don't know, 0.42 or 4 grams per square centimeter per year. But we weren't interested in the whole component. We want to subtract out the organics, the calcium carbonate, and the biogenic silica. So when you subtract those out, it drops the accumulation rate down here to about 0.16 grams per square centimeter per year at the coring site. Then we need to account for the focusing factor, which is almost 3. So you need to divide this number by about 3 and you get 5.05. And then you multiply that by the lake area to get the overall grand sediment accumulation rate in the lake. And that comes out to be 489 tons of clays and silts going to the bottom of the lake. That's a pretty big number, as we'll see. There are some limitations to this. This was from a single core. It would have been better had you had 5 cores or 10 cores, but it's expensive to do. And so I understand why people generally don't. And the method in general has not been, I don't think, well compared against other methods of trying to get at the sediment budget of the lake, like we've done here. Like you have the data you've been collecting over the last 15 years, and that is by measuring the flows and the concentrations in the inlet streams and the outlet streams to the lake, and we should compare these two numbers. And as Trevor talked about, you get the load by multiplying the concentration, which is a weight per unit volume. You multiply that times the volume for that year, the stream flow, and then you get the weight that comes into the lake every year. Over this, I guess, looks like a 16 or 17 year average, we can calculate the inlet, the loads coming in the inlets here. They add up to 66. The outlet loads appear to be, at least with the data I saw, almost virtually all algae. So it looks like all the clays and silts are being trapped. I'm a little skeptical of that, but those are the numbers that we have. That it means that the accumulation rate here, I meant to put that image earlier, but 66 tons in, it all goes to the bottom, not much comes out essentially. So this is the other estimate we have of what the loading into the lake is. It's quite a bit different than the sediment core one. So there's a discrepancy, but that's we have to kind of tease apart, you know, which is the better number. So that's part of the question are these numbers that we get for accumulation of sediment in the lake, are they large or not? And there are a couple ways of looking at that. We tried at least four different ways to answer this question. And mostly it's how does how do the inlet streams and their concentrations and loads, how do they compare to reference conditions or to other sites, at least to give us some idea about their relative intensity, their relative values. One way was to try to compare the input loading under reference, meaning natural or pre-sediment conditions. And we did this by looking at a paper by Dale Robertson. He's a good statistician with the U.S. Geological Survey. He looked at what he considered to be reference conditions for sediment across the whole Upper Great Lakes region. And so this is a big area study. I looked at our tiny little area, and I don't know how specific that could be to Forest Lake, but this was the number that I pulled off of his map. 7.1 milligrams per liter in the stream. The standard now is 30. So this feels about right. I mean, it's certainly less than what our standards are. And the pre-settlement conditions should be less than what we're seeing nowadays. It also gave a yield from the landscape of that many tons per hectare per year. When you apply those numbers to Forest Lake, the average flows coming in from Little Comfort and from Sunrise River and from the direct basin around the lake, which was not considered in the previous sediment budget, the total getting into the lake is about 115 tons, more or less. Well, I don't know how much of that gets trapped. If half of it gets trapped, then half of it is accumulated and half of it passes out. So here's a guesstimated sediment budget. If this much would come in under reference conditions, some of it would get trapped and some of it would go out the outlet. So this is another estimate for sediment accumulation rate. It's less than what we've measured with the stream flow measurements and much less than the sediment core. But again, these are reference conditions and they should be less. So at least qualitatively, things are adding up here. The next way to see whether Comfort Lake has an extraordinarily large sediment load, we looked at what the concentrations were in the inlet streams relative to standards and the outlet streams. Well, the Sunrise River coming in here is typically well below the standard of 30 milligrams per liter of sediment. And the outlet is virtually, well, over 90% of the time compliant. Little Comfort Inlet here has a little higher non-compliance here. And I'll point out this is actually, I think this measurement is actually taken upstream of Little Comfort Lake here, not at the place where it enters Big Comfort. But so there's a potential concern here, but it's still most of the time it is compliant, at least. The third way we compared the rates at Comfort Lake was to look at other sites in the metro area. This was data that Trevor put together from Met Council to compare with other metro area streams. And you can see that the top is suspended sediment concentrations in these streams, and the bottom is the loading rate, the pounds per unit area per year, not just the pounds, not just the concentration. And in both cases, the Little Comfort and Sunrise River concentrations and loading rates here, yields, were on the very low end of all the streams in the metro area. So there are a couple other streams that are as good or better in some cases, but not many. Most of them are much worse than these. The third, I guess this is the fourth method we looked at. The question was, is the turbidity in Comfort Lake driven by just algae, or is there a sediment component that makes it extra turbid in addition to just having algae? This is a plot of lake clarity, the Secchi disk reading. So the deeper the Secchi disk reading would be toward the top. That would be the clearer lakes are up here. And the more algae you get down here, the more chlorophyll you have, the less clear the water is. And this line defines then the relation basically between how algae decreases the clarity of a lake. And if you're close to that line, as Comfort Lake is, that means you're pretty much, the clarity is very much related to the algal content of the water. If you drop below that, if your clarity is lower than expected, given the algal concentration you have, given the chlorophyll concentration, then you can expect that there was a turbidity component from clays and silt that got into the lake. And Comfort Lake plots, really very close to this line. It's as close, it is the closest lake on the line. So it's most typically driven by the algal content. That's what the clarity is driven by more than anything else. So there's no reason from this plot to suspect that, well, Comfort Lake it's certainly similar to all the other lakes in the district in terms of what its algal related clarity is. And so it doesn't look like, at least ways in your case compared to other lakes here, that there is an excess of clay and silt content that's causing turbidity issues in Comfort Lake. Okay, to summarize, the sediment component we're most interested in this little view of the sediment world, we were looking at the non-volatile suspended solids, the eroded silts and clays from soils. We tried to look at how much was there from a couple different ways, the lead 210 dating and the stream monitoring methods. They're pretty different. Is this rate large? Well, even under natural conditions, it's almost 60. And that was only a little bit less than what we were measuring here, assuming this number is pretty good. The concentrations in the inlet streams are not large compared to leaseways, not compared to the standards. Little Comfort has maybe a little bit of issues coming into it, but that's to be expected. The concentration and layer rates are low compared to other metro area streams, and their turbidity in Comfort Lake does not seem to be driven by silts and clays. So to conclude, I guess that makes us, I would say that in general, it doesn't seem like Comfort Lake has a big issue with clays and silts getting into it. The accumulation rate from the lead 210 study seems anomalously large to me. I will certainly raise the issue with my former colleagues there, because these are things that we'll talk about over beer sometimes. But I want to make sure that this curve that they developed, any error that's in this curve is they're self-consistent. So the trends in this curve, I think, are very clear and very important and very real. The absolute values, well, we could shift those back and forth a little bit and come up with much different numbers, but the trends are clear and important. I mean, it's clearly the lake is getting more sediment now than it did in the past by about a factor of 3. Reductions in TSS may be possible to Little Comfort Inlet. Additional monitoring between School Lake and Little Comfort Lake might be useful, and a walk through the area doing a model survey would be useful as well. So with that, I can ask some, well, I can try to answer questions if you have some, I guess.
Any questions?
This is where you tell me I was muted the whole time, right? And you didn't hear any of it.
Well, I'm sure I'll have some questions, but I need to study this a little bit more before I can formulate questions.
Sure.
And I'd like to be able to send those to you once I've completed that deeper dive into this report,
yeah,
if that's acceptable.
Any other questions? If not, Jim,
I really do want to talk to the guys at the research station about this, because I know that this is the type of topic that really excites them to find out. You know, they've been measuring things like this for years, and now here we have independent evidence about how it matches up with loading and rates and flows, and that's what science is really. That's when science gets exciting. You find what matches up, what doesn't, and you try to figure out how to make them intersect. Where are the errors? Where's the variability that we can clean up and maybe get a better answer? So
I have just a question. In terms of, we're dealing with volumes here, you know, how much volume you have in sediment, you know, how much sediment you have on the bottom, right? You can measure that. So why haven't we looked at it from a perspective of, if it's 489 tons per year has a certain volume associated with it. If you had that every year, how deep would the sediment on the bottom be, and how close are we to that number?
yeah, I think it's a pretty thin layer, even though it sounds like a lot.
It is.
And
huh?
I think it is on the order of millimeters or so, something
really?
like that. I could be wrong, but typically in this part of the world, in the middle part of a lake, well, these lakes are 14,000 years old, and they would have on the order of 10 meters of mud in them. Maybe a little more, maybe a little. Well, the shallow lakes will have less, but lakes like Comfort that don't go dry and haven't lost sediment over the years will probably, I presume, have on the order of 10 meters of mud. And in my mind, that's about a millimeter per year, or a little less over a 14,000 year lake history. So a millimeter per year is a good estimate about, for a lot of lakes in the middle, what comes in.
Right.
Now, we've disrupted the landscape with urbanization and agriculture, so maybe it's a couple millimeters now, but it's a little dense, and that's denser stuff, so it compresses the sediment as well, so.
I found it interesting when I took that cruise in Stillwater to look at when they were building that new bridge in
Oh, yeah.
Stillwater. And at that point in time, they had just put in the pilings and all that. And I found it kind of interesting is that they had to go down 85 feet to get to the original river bottom through mud.
Well,
So-
I know the lake has been cored back in the 80s. When I was in grad school, it was done about 5 years before I got to grad school. And I think it was on the order of 13 or 14 meters of mud. So it was like less than 50 feet of, that's Holocene sediment. That's the last 14,000 years or so. Well, the lake is, let me revise it. The lake is about a little less than 11,000 years old.
Okay.
And it dates about the same time as Lake Pepin, because I think it formed when Lake Pepin was dammed from the Chippewa River Dam. That backed up water all the way through the Mississippi Valley, all the way back up the Twin Cities, and all the way back up the St. Croix Valley as well by Stillwater. So they're contemporaneous lakes driven by a dam in the Mississippi down at Pepin. It's a fascinating story of the glacial history of our lakes. So,
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Very interesting.
Yeah, Mr. President,
Why
I
was
was
it
just going, I was just going to note, just doing some, I guess, mental math on that layer. If a ton of soil is roughly a cubic yard, and the lake is 200 and some acres, if you spread that across, I think about agronomic rates. If you're putting on lime, you put on 2 to 3 acres, and you can see the truck go across. You have to walk across the field, and you're hard pressed to see that layer on the field. So it's really so a cubic yard across an acre or so would not be very much. So that conforms to Jim's observation about what the depth or thickness would be.
Thank you. It's getting more interesting all the time as we go along here.
Well, it's good. You'll do more studies on Comfort Lake coming up, and I'd be interested in getting new data on it. So,
well, part of the question was also just for us was that, how did it compare? We've done several of these cores, and then, were some of the other lakes low, or was Comfort Lake high? Which one was it? And so part of the analysis that Jim presented is showing kind of both, that Comfort Lake really isn't sort of out of the ballpark, but we could look at the historical core data and say, yeah, it's higher than what it was from 100 and some years ago. So there's still, and we know there's work to be done, and staff has been out looking at that area from School Lake down to Little Comfort, and we have that as part of our project area for our grant in this coming year. So.
Okay, so thanks again. Let's just move on then. If there are no other questions, we need to discuss number 7D, 2022 water monitoring scope of work. And then we have 2 motions that have associated with that discussion.
Correct, Mr. President, managers. So this is the proposed budget and scope of work, or well, I guess the budget has already been approved, but it's the associated scope of work with the budget as planned. And I guess we're prepared to take any questions that the board might have.
I just have one, Mr. President.
Go ahead, Jackie.
I didn't see the inlet to Big Comfort from Little Comfort. So the outflow from Little Comfort into Big Comfort. We had talked about monitoring that. The sediment report shows that that's one of the bigger areas for sediment loading. And I don't see it on the monitoring report. I'm just asking why.
Well, I guess maybe EOR can verify this, but it's been my understanding that the the roadway there, well, one, it's difficult to access, but also the lakes, the areas drop off such that we would not be able to put anything that would be continuous in those locations for monitoring.
Yeah, it's just, that site just isn't conducive for monitoring for two reasons. One, that pipe is submerged most of the time, so you really can't get good flows, and it's more an equalizer pipe between the two lakes than really an input point. And so, and then the other thing is it's just very dangerous to have field staff accessing that location by the highway there. I know we have on occasion taken some grab samples in that area just to take a look at that. But that's the reason why that is not a long-term monitoring site. A, we don't get good data from it, and B, it's a safety issue for staff.
Okay,
And I can add to that, last year during the lake monitoring, we were regularly collecting samples, surface water samples from that area as close as we could get in to the culvert from the lake itself.
okay, good. Thank you, Blaine. So we are gathering some data.
Any other questions? If not, I have just one more also. If you go to page 2 of that email, Bobby. First of all, on page 1, you see stream monitoring is $90,000, which is a really high part of the whole monitoring costs. And of that, 50, almost 50,000 has to do with the 12 streams in the Comfort Lake Management Lake District. And so I'm just raising the question from a price value aspect. We do monitoring to do adaptive management and to make decisions and change things, et cetera. Is spending 51,000 where you see it right there, and that also includes the 2 projects. I don't know how much we're going to spend on the 2 projects for that have been listed there, but I can't imagine it's a high percentage of that 51,000. So we're spending a lot of money on those 12 streams, and they're all in the Comfort Lake Management District. So, and I know I'm familiar with these streams. They don't have a high recreational value. They connect the lakes, et cetera. But is that a good price value for us to do every year, or should we be doing it less frequently? It would be a question I'd like addressed when you guys make your report. I guess we're going to vote on it tonight, though, aren't we? Yeah. So it's a question I just raised right now. And if somebody wants to comment on that, it would be. And then why aren't we doing measurement on the streams in the Forest Lake Management District? Now, we did it on the diagnostic study one time, right, last year, but we're not doing it every year like it's proposed here. So
I could speak to that,
answer
Mr. President.
Oh, go ahead, Blaine.
So that is the diagnostic monitoring for the Comfort Lake Management District. It's on the 3-year rotation. Rotate through Bone Lake. Forest Lake was last year. Now we're moving into Little Comfort to Comfort. So we're intensively monitoring Little Comfort this year as part of the diagnostic. It also includes the project effectiveness on those 2 other projects which you indicated. So it is quite an intensive monitoring effort. Staff is going out, collecting data, collecting grab samples, doing flow monitoring. So it is very intensive, and as such is a large portion of the budget for the stream monitoring. The long-term sites indicated in the line item just above that is the ISCO automated stream monitoring units that we have. They are triggered during a large storm event, collect water every half an hour, and then we go, EUR goes out and compiles those samples and collects a subsample from that. So we've got a machine doing the collection there. So a little bit less expensive for that element, but it all comes together to get a really good idea of the load that we're having coming down through the system and contributing to the nutrient impairment of Comfort Lake.
Okay, my mistake, because I misinterpreted what that was. So I understand it fully right now, and we can just dismiss that question. Thank you. So, thank you, Blaine.
My pleasure.
Okay, any other questions? If not, I think we need 2 motions here. The first motion has to do with approve the monitoring plan, which we can't do that yet, can we, until we review it next Monday, the next meeting? And the second one is to approve the authorize the administrator on the advice of council to enter into an agreement with EOR to complete task 1 through 3 for not to exceed $95,682.
So, Mr. President, motion number 1 is the 2022 plan. So that's the upcoming
Okay,
schedule.
right,
So,
right. So we
not the
need both
monitor,
of them then. Yep.
yeah, not the monitoring report.
This is Jackie. I will make motion number 1, approving the 2022 monitoring plan as presented.
We have a second. I'll move to second that motion. Is there any other discussion on that particular motion, which is approving the monitoring plan for 2022? Okay, hearing none, ask Bobby to do a roll call vote.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Bucky,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. We
I will
now
make,
need,
make motion number 2 as presented.
thank you, Jackie.
And I will second that.
Okay, thanks, Doug. Any other discussion? Hearing none, we'll ask Bobby to do a roll call vote.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Bucky,
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. So now we move down to old business, item number A, the tax forfeit project boarding and final design authorization. We've had discussion on that already. Are there any questions or comments?
Mr. Chair, is there an additional item for the annual report? 7E?
Oh, yes, I missed that. Thank you very much, Dave. Okay, let's back up and go back to 7E. 2021 year-end review and annual report and progress report. Thank you.
Mr. President and managers, these are items for distribution. They are not intended to be for discussion this evening, but rather we will look to have, well, the final audit will be coming at the April 28th meeting. And then Emily has prepared these other reports, the annual report, which we send to the state, but also the progress report, which is our district's own metric-driven data sets and analysis. But at the April 14th meeting, we'll collect information or questions the board might have on the monitoring report. The goal is to then have the final data sets incorporated into the annual report, which is the second item that's a link in the online version, and then be able to submit those. So these are for board review at this time, and if there's any questions at any time between now and the 14th or at the meeting on the 14th, please let us know.
I just have a request, Mr. President. I would like hard copies of the 2021 year in review summary and the 2021 annual report at this time. And it looks like we're waiting for something on the progress report. So when that's final, I would like that one also hard copy.
It's the full report is the first link, so it's ready to go, and we can print that and have that delivered as well.
Okay, I thought
we're set outside. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought Appendix F was missing on the big report, the progress report.
Yes, but I guess it would be aligned with the monitoring report that
Okay,
you all have received. But yes. Okay.
all right, very good.
Mike, is there a tighter timeline on the annual report? I thought when I read that there was a tighter timeline, or are we still covered with your timing that you gave for the annual report?
It needs to be submitted by April 30th, and Emily always does an excellent job of getting that to the state by then.
So I would recommend, if everybody has a chance, to send your comments in ahead of time, but we can collect them, and then we can make comments about them at the meeting. But this is a very important, I think, especially since these documents will probably be used in the next year or so as we move ahead on our visioning building project to communicate with the public. So if we don't bring these documents up, they're certainly going to look at them. And so we want to make sure that they provide us the best summary of what we've been able to accomplish in terms that are easily understood by our taxpayers and appreciated by our taxpayers. So that's why I think it's worthwhile for everybody to take a look at these and offer any suggestions on how they can be strengthened if we can. And then who else would like copies besides Jackie? Anybody else?
I would, please.
That's two. Anybody else?
Yes, please.
Okay, so we have 3 copies then. And then can they just pick them up at the office? What's the suggestion here?
Yeah, we're gonna print it and then people can let us know if they want them delivered, or else if they're coming into town, we could just put them outside the office door on that table.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, great. Anything else on this topic? Okay.
Or
if
we can
not,
put it in the mail.
I can pick mine up.
Okay.
yeah, just managers that need them, just let Mike know which way you would like to do it, whether mail it to you or just pick it up at the office on the outbox there.
I would pick mine up, please.
Same with me.
Okay, moving on then to item 8A, the tax forfeit project. We've discussed this already. Does any of the board managers have any comments or questions? It looks like we have 2 motions here again.
Yeah. Just about to make the first one.
Okay,
I
Jackie?
will move to adopt resolution 220301.
Is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay, Manager Taves, thank you. Any discussion on this motion? Okay, hearing none, then I'll call
Mr. Chair,
for it. Yes,
may I suggest that the board consider that resolution doesn't define the project? And I would suggest that either in the resolution or just in the minutes, that it incorporate both the Himes Lake drainage and the North Highway 61 drainage features. The latter one is that add alternate piece that Kevin described, and it doesn't mean you need to proceed with that. It simply leaves open your opportunity to do so if you should at any point decide to do so.
Manager Anderson, would you like to amend your motion to include the suggestions of legal counsel?
Yes, I would.
Okay.
And I think, Bobby, rather than trying to restate that, if you can incorporate what Mr. Holtman just said, you can add that to motion 1 as appropriate. Maybe after the date encompassing the Himes Lake drainage project and the Highway 61 added feature.
Bobby, are you okay with that?
Nope, she says can
Okay,
do
she's
and
got-
can.
Can do, I see it. Okay, good. We're good to go then. So did we have a second on the motion? I can't recall.
Yes. I
Okay, then
seconded
we're-
that.
So then with a second, we can ask for a roll call vote.
Manager
Bobby?
Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. The second motion is to authorize under the advice of council to enter into an agreement with EOR in accordance with the scope of 31722, not to exceed $112,286. Someone make that motion?
I'll make the motion.
Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Sorry to intrude again. The motion that I'm looking at gives the managers a choice whether you're authorizing just the base, the design work for the base project, or also adding that additional piece. There's two different dollar figures there.
So we should include both. Correct?
Well, I think it's your choice at this point to make it at least a tentative decision about just doing the base project or the additional North Highway 61 piece as well.
Both projects were added to the first motion. Moves to adopt resolution 220301 with those two features, the base project of Himes Lake and the add-on of Highway 61
Yeah.
project.
Mr. Chair, Manager Anderson, that resolution was to order both projects, and that simply is a threshold action that you need to take in order to proceed to spend tax levies to develop designs. But it doesn't obligate you to do that additional piece at this time. So it's really your choice now in, in authorizing EOR to proceed just with the base project at this time, or with the add alternate as well.
Well, it seems to me if we're going to be doing that project, that it's best to do it at the same time, both projects. I would think there would be a savings in the work being performed. So
I think the issue here is whether we want, the first project was like $580 a pound. And then adding the second project, the additional benefit we gained was at $1,000 or $1,100 a pound, which is close to what's acceptable. But I guess the board has to decide, do we want to spend that extra money at $1,000 a pound to get those extra poundages out? And if we're going to do it, we probably we have to do it at the same time, I would guess.
Yeah.
But I guess maybe EOR or someone else can comment. The other question on this is are we going to learn anything more between now and when we actually start the project to convince us not to do the second edition add-on that we had talked about?
Mr. Chair, Board of Managers, so if the district is desiring to continue to look at both pieces, the base and the add alternate, we can continue to design those. One of the things that we can do for you is we can also let this project so that that piece continues to be a true add alternate, at which point the bids will come back itemized accordingly, and you can determine to select or reject that at that point. To further answer your question, or multiple questions that have been asked, without a doubt, it would be less expensive to do these projects concurrently. You can imagine that if you did the add alternate separately, which you can do, and could be done at a later date, the sum cost is going to be greater because doing the two separately is going to result in higher overall costs. But they certainly could be built separately, but you're likely to be build them less expensively if they're done concurrently.
But this motion pertains mainly to the scope of work, which EOR is going to be doing, not construction costs, correct?
yes, that's my understanding. They're going to be
So-
laying out the project, right?
So, right, so if we're going to try to make a decision whether it's worth it or not, after we get the bids back, we have to authorize both scopes of work to be done.
Yes.
If we don't-
and the difference is 13,000, a
Yeah.
little over $13,000. And we've approved larger amounts like this to add on because of adaptive management. It makes sense to do these projects and to join them together. So I would amend my motion to authorize the administrator on advice of council to enter into an agreement with EOR in accordance with the 3/17/22 scope of work and in an amount not to exceed $112,826, including the add alternative.
Good, thank you, Manager Anderson. Do we have a second to that?
I'll still second that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Doug. So now, is there any other discussion on this? So actually, we're going to move forward and evaluate both of them. And they're going to be kept separate. So at the time of construction, we can still decide to do one or the other or both. That's the way I interpret it. Is that a good interpretation, Chuck?
Yeah, Mr. President, I guess, yeah, one of the things that when we talked with EOR about it, so yes, that's the way we would proceed with it on the design side, and then bid the project out, and then depending on where the additional cost piece. The item for consideration is to recognize that the water coming along 61 would eventually go to the same drainage area as Himes Lake and then come in. Where you get some additional treatment is during certain conditions where you're going to have a high flow bypass. We can't back up water. We're just trying to kick over some of that lower flow, if you will, and maybe higher concentration stuff over into the wetland piece. But we thought there was probably, from a general standpoint, it may be only 50-50 chance that we would want to proceed with this at best. So that's our, at least the kind of current thinking on this, but it did make sense to proceed with moving this forward with the ad alternate and then seeing where the bids come in. Because if we end up with really high fuel prices and construction costs are much higher than driving up the overall cost per pound, then the board would have a decision point later on to make.
Thank you, Mike. So after that clarification, is there any other discussion or questions?
I just wanted to add this, that it seems to me that this project would be ideal for that new DNR grant about restoring or protecting wetland areas, or any number of other grants out there. So I think we need to keep that in mind too.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, hearing no comments. I think we have a second on this, don't we?
Yes.
Yeah, okay,
Yes.
so hearing no other comments or suggestions, I'll call for a roll call vote.
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Loaf,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, Matt. The motion passes. Next item, 8B, Washington Judicial Ditch number 6, diversion petition.
Mr. Chair, managers, so this petition, as recommended by council, is for the district to petition the district itself, basically, for this project. The resolution lays out basically what we're looking to do, but is required under the judicial ditch law. Since that project on JD6 is looking to remove water out, go through the treatment system, but it's the fact that we're extracting it that requires the petition.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Mike. Any comments or suggestions? If none, I'll call for a motion. This would mean adopting resolution 220302.
Manager Anderson, I will make this motion as presented.
Thank you, Manager Anderson. Do we have a second, please?
Second.
Thanks, Chris. Any other discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call for a roll call vote. Bobby?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Loaf,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. Thank you. The next item is office space visioning, and we're getting kind of late here and we still got to go through the governance manual. So I'm recommending that that we maybe postpone this item to next week, especially since the materials were sent out to you late here. We had some miscommunication on my part. This is a very important topic. We've got to move forward on this, and I'd like everybody to look at what was sent out, think about it, and then when we come back at the next meeting, we'd like to get some input, especially from the new board managers. Jackie and I have been working on this for over 2 years, and so we're getting tired of looking at each other, so we need some input from the new board managers on what you think we should do or how we should go about this. And so I tried to outline some of the stuff we had talked about in the past, and I maybe left one item out after rereading it, and I'll maybe send that out to you before the next meeting. Is everybody okay with that?
Oh. Just to
Yes.
clarify, I never get tired of looking at you, Steve.
Well, thank you, Jackie. I appreciate it. I'll take that as a compliment for sure. Okay, so we'll put this on the next agenda item if it fits in after talking with Mike. So then let's move on to the governor's manual update from last week. And Mike, do you want to tee that one up?
Yes, Mr. President, managers. So of in the memo, the bottom link is the one with the mark that's marked up with the changes. However, there was a request to do some additional discussion by Manager Loth, and so I guess we can open up for that discussion.
I just want to make the motion to reopen for discussion the governance manual.
I'll
Okay,
second.
thank you. Do we have a second? Is that
I
Jackie?
seconded. Yep.
Okay, Jackie seconds. Thank you. All in favor? Or is there any other discussion? If not, we'll call for a roll call vote. Bobby?
Manager Schmaltz.
Aye.
Manager Anderson.
Aye.
Manager Wolf.
Aye.
Manager Taves.
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Chris, you want to make your comments or suggestions?
Yeah, it's a quick comment, and it pertains to section 3, part B, number 3. And the governance manual currently reads, and this pertains to what is termed necessary duty. And number 3 is a meeting or other event that is not primarily social that the manager has been authorized to attend by the board or the administrator. In some exchanges with counsel, Mr. Holtman, the thought arose that since the board has control over employment of Administrator Kinney and also determining what his compensation is, that to ensure as much oversight as we can, that we might want to consider removing the administrator from pre-authorizing per diems and keep that within the board. I don't think there's an issue. I'm not suggesting there's an issue, but I just thought it was something that we might want to consider keeping in the board.
I believe that in the past, it had been the treasurer that was supposed to review these. Is that correct?
Well, this is approving this section B3, 3B3 under per diems. This is getting authorization to attend an event that couldn't be approved by the full board because it fell in between board meetings. And it wasn't something that was known at the prior board meeting. So this is just an opportunity for managers to partake in those sorts of events as they become aware of them. And it was on this one, just the administrator that had that authority to grant that and then bring it to the board at the next meeting for authorization, formal authorization. And I added the president because sometimes, Mike's very busy and you can't get a hold of him in time for this kind of thing. So it included the president as an option for that. I don't want to call it an emergency, but that in-between meeting authorization. So I don't see any problem with the way it's written. The administrator has always in the past had that authority and it's worked out fine. So I don't see any need to change that personally.
Would there be an option to put in there so really the president or the administrator only gets involved on an exception basis, is that correct?
That's correct.
Right, so maybe we just add that language and we're covered, because that means it's not going to be done on a regular basis, which could be implied, as Chris noted here, interpreted that way. But if we just add the as an exception basis, and our legal counsel understands that intent and could rephrase that so it appears as an exception and not as a daily or a monthly procedure, regular procedure.
Yeah, I like that. I like adding that exception language because the first choice, of course, is to come to the board if you know
Correct.
about it.
Right. But as you explained it, it is an exception, right? And so we're not going to be doing it on a regular basis. And Chuck, do you have any comment on that? Would that help clarify this situation based upon Manager Loss' concern?
Well, we could certainly say, or say a little bit more specifically that if there's not been an opportunity to bring it before the board, and then that would establish the expectation for all of you about that. Certainly we can do that part. And if you're comfortable with the administrator, the question when Manager Luff asked me and we talked about it a bit, my thought was that the decision about is a certain event something where a manager can make a per diem claim will involve some measure of judgment about whether it's something that advances the manager's ability to perform your job better, and is it something that there should be compensation for. And so I did raise the question of whether that's something that the board should govern itself as a question of mutual policy, or whether it's something that the administrator should be asked to make that judgment on behalf of the board. So that's why I raised it. But of course, Manager Anderson has noted that the administrator has had that authority, and if it hasn't been an issue, then there's nothing broken that needs to be fixed. In which case you can just add the language suggested about considering it as an exception, and that would be just fine.
Okay, so how's the board feel about that? Everybody okay with that?
I'm okay.
Do we need a motion to change this, Chuck?
So yeah, technically speaking, you would have a motion right now, since you voted to reconsider the prior action of approving the change. That prior motion is now open in front of you. So first, there should be a motion to amend that motion to add a reference to it being an exception. Or you don't need two motions. You can just have one motion to adopt the proposed changes with the additional reference to it being an exception. Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah. So I'll make that motion as stated by our legal counsel, and that we can just use that terminology to change it. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Okay, Chris seconded it. Any further discussion? Okay, hearing none, I'll call for a roll call vote. Bobby?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Chaves.
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Thank you. Okay, so now we have a report of staff. Mike?
President and managers, I don't think there's really much to note. I did have a conversation just the other day with the University of Minnesota staff that's doing this. They're doing watershed specialist training about how to revamp their program, and they were quite interested in our sequential diagnostic monitoring and how we've proceeded to get the goals we have accomplished, given that that's not the norm for most organizations. So yeah, that was a good meeting. And then I have a meeting, it's the Midwest leadership in watershed management meeting next week as well.
Mike, who was the first meeting with? U of M?
University of Minnesota Water Resources Center staff.
Okay,
Mhm.
it's great.
Good, thanks, Mike. Any questions for Mike? If not, report from EOR.
Sorry, I'm on mute. I'm not going to go through the long list today. I think EOR presentations have taken up a good chunk of the meeting already tonight. Hopefully you guys found those informative, and if there's any questions on my report in the packet, please shoot them at me.
Okay, thanks, Greg. Okay, any questions for Greg? Okay, if
Just to
not,
say,
then-
nice job. It was nice to have those reports in detail. Thank you.
Nice to hear.
Okay, next, Smith Partners. Chuck?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, I'm here.
I'm sorry, no, I have nothing to offer.
Okay, thank you. Report of the treasurer. Jackie?
Yes, let's see. We have money in the bank. I'm trying to get to that page, sorry. Okay, here we go. We have income for the period of 497,009.92, so almost 410 or 497,010. And we have bills to pay of 261,132.76. And unless there's any questions on the report, I would make a motion to approve the report and pay the bills.
Do we have a motion to that effect?
I
Okay,
made
if
the
not-
motion.
Oh, you made the motion. We need
I
a
made the
second
motion.
then, please.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will second that.
Okay, Doug seconded it. Any other discussion or questions? Okay, hearing none, then we'll call for a roll call vote. Bobby?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Lowe,
Aye.
Manager Chaves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion passes. And while we're on the topic, Jackie, we have to sign checks tomorrow. What time would you be coming in?
I can come in 8:30, 9, somewhere there.
Okay, so I'll come in after 9:30. How's that? Bobby, you'll be there to let us in? I think you're muted, Bobby.
Oh, sorry. Yes, I will be at the office tomorrow.
Great. Okay. Thank
Just
you.
a question for Chuck. Steve was always the second one to sign as the treasurer for oversight responsibilities. Is that still hold, Chuck, or is that?
Or
is that
since I'm
necessary?
retired and I want to sleep in, can I come in second?
Is that necessary?
The policy does have the retirement clause. In fact, well, no, in fact, it's not essential for signing specific checks that the treasurer signs second. The treasurer's oversight is, is a general monthly oversight, not a sequence for each specific check.
Oh, so I see. You were just being kind to Steve to come in second, always. I get it.
But I would note that, Jackie, because you are the one going to the bank, I don't know if we need 2 signatures on that transfer check.
I believe we do on all checks.
Right.
So that might.
Okay, well then you pick the time. Thank you, Bobby. I'll have to buy you coffee tomorrow.
So I've got to come in first then.
Yeah.
Okay,
you're-
I'll be in around 8:30 then. How's that?
Okay.
Okay, good. Now we get that resolved. Moving on, summary. Oh, no, we got report of officers and managers. Jackie, you want, oh, let's see.
Yeah, I can start.
Yeah, go ahead, Jackie. We'll just go across the line.
Yeah, just a couple things, since we're following the treasurer's report. I did hear back from our accountant at Redpath, and she's finally done with her year ends with her other clients. And so she's got time now to meet on revamping our reports. And so if any of you have any suggestions that you want to incorporate, please contact me. But I will start sometime next week when we can coordinate our schedules. We'll start on that process next week. And it'll take us a while. So we may have a new report to look at in April if we can get it all done. And that's obviously for your perusal and comment when that occurs. Second thing, Mike and I were at the MAUD legislative meeting last week in the middle part of the week, and everything's going well for our legislation. So we're looking for success this year. And the increase on our administrative fund or general fund goes by a number of different names, but we're not limiting that to 500,000, which is the doubling of the current rate, 250. It hasn't been raised in 24 years. Instead, we have amended the legislation so that it will float on the mill rate that's established in that chapter of law. And that will be great because it will allow small districts, of course, their limit, and larger districts. We have some really large districts in outstate Minnesota. It will allow them to budget based on their, to raise that levy to accommodate their 10-year plan and their annual budgets based off of that. So that's really a big win. That's a really big change in the legislative mindset on this particular topic. So we feel very confident, always with a grain of salt, of course, but confident that that legislation will pass. And then we're working hard with the folks that are the partners. It's a partnership really, working on the salt issue. And so that is having some good success. I'm not sure if the legislature will actually approve money, but it's a good vehicle for awareness building, and with the budget surplus, it's a good year to try. So those are the two big issues in our area. There's some minor legislation, but nothing as large of an impact as those two. If you have any questions, you can certainly call me or go on the MAUD website and follow the newsletters and the updates.
Hey, thank you, Jackie.
Sure.
Manager Baki.
Mr. President, I have nothing to report. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Manager Taves.
Only that Moody Lake has hosted a whole bunch of merganser ducks today. It's kind of fun to see.
Wow. Good. Manager Lewis.
Just sharing that the Lake Association is going to hold, hopefully, the ice cleanup of Forest Lake on Saturday, pending some drilling of some test holes tomorrow to confirm that the event can be completed in a safe manner.
You mentioned there's a free lunch and the board's invited if they want to come afterwards.
Free lunch, free drinks.
Free drink, or free lunch. It's only about 2 hours worth of work. It's pretty good, pretty much fun. Okay. I have nothing to report on today either, so we can move on then to summary and approval of board direction. Chuck, do you have anything? for us?
Mr. Chair, staff will prepare hard copies of the year in review annual report and progress report for managers Anderson, Taves, and Baki, I believe, unless it was manager Loth, I wasn't 100% sure. And they will pick them up. And that's all I have.
Good, thank you. Any other comments or suggestions? If not, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Our next regular board meeting is April 14th. Somebody want
I will
to
second that motion. I'll
Okay.
second it.
Okay, moved and seconded. Bobby, you want to do a roll call vote, please?
Manager Schmaltz,
Aye.
Manager Anderson,
Aye.
Manager Loth,
Aye.
Manager Taves,
Aye.
Manager Baki.
Aye.
Okay, motion carries.